His smile used to be my sunrise. I had no idea that one day it would be my downfall. They call me Miss Ellie at the Ashwood Market. On most Saturdays, you'll find me behind a wooden stall draped in white linen, selling bundles of rosemary and jars of honey lavender balm I made myself. Folks say I have a soothing voice, a warm laugh, and a kind way of speaking to people. Some even say I remind them of their mothers or grandmothers. But no one ever guesses the truth. No one looks at my trembling hands as I weigh the chamomile and wonders what those hands have endured. No one sees the quiet war behind my smile. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. Because the boy I raised, my only child, my Michael, raped me for 10 years while I lay paralyzed in a bed he said he was caring for me in. He told neighbors I was his brave, sick mother, told them he gave up everything to take care of me. That boy, he wiped my tears by day and stole every last piece of me by night. I never imagined I'd say those words out loud, but I've carried them too long, and I've lived too long to still live in silence. My name is Eleanor Walker. I'm 72 years old. I live in a small house on Willow Creek Lane in Ashwood, Oregon, a town no one ever really moves to or from, where people still wave at you when you drive by, and the biggest gossip is who made the best peach pie at the fair. My herb shop sits 2 blocks from the post office. I walk there most mornings with a wicker basket and a thermos of ginger tea, nodding to old men sweeping their porches. They think I'm gentle, resilient. Maybe I am, but I wasn't always. Once, I was just a girl with raw knuckles and a needle between her fingers. I was 19 when I gave birth to Michael. His father, Richard Morgan, was the kind of man who knew how to lean against a wall just right and make a girl feel like the world might stop spinning if he looked at her too long. He disappeared the week I told him I was pregnant. Left nothing behind but a lopsided smile in my memory and a baby boy in my arms. I worked at Ashwood Textiles back then. It was a squat, windowless factory that buzzed with machines and the ache of women who'd already given up on dreams. We sewed uniforms mostly for warehouses, for prisons, for logging crews. Nothing fancy. My fingers grew strong, quick. I wore a dark blue apron every day, the same one for 15 years. It's still hanging on the back of my pantry door. There's a faint smell of starch on it, and one of the front pockets has a burn mark from when I leaned too close to the iron press. I keep it to remind myself where I started. There's also a small metal thimble in my sewing box. It's dull and dented, with a chip near the rim. I wore it every shift, every stitch. It saved me from hundreds of needle pricks, but not from the kind of wounds you can't see. I raised Michael alone. We lived in a rented 2-bedroom house with creaky floors and a stove that only lit with a match. I made his baby food myself, mashed sweet potatoes with cinnamon, applesauce I canned in old pickle jars. When he was sick, I'd sleep sitting upright beside his crib, holding his tiny foot just to feel it warm against my palm. Every morning, I woke at 5:30 sharp. The old kitchen clock, round, brown, with a faded red second hand, stopped ticking sometime in the mid-90s, but I never fixed it. That little red hand still rests at 5:30, just like I did for 30 years. I don't remember resenting the work. I remember holding his school pants up to the window to check for loose threads. I remember saving for months to buy him a winter coat from a catalog. I remember writing his name in every notebook, making his lunches with little handwritten notes that said, "Love you always, Mom." He brought those notes home, crumpled and stained with peanut butter, but never thrown away. I thought that meant something. Michael was a quiet boy, sweet in his own way. He'd hum songs while sweeping the porch. He told me often, sometimes daily, that I was the best mother in the world. When I was exhausted from work, he'd bring me a cup of water and say, "Someday, I'm going to take care of you, Mama, just like you do for me." And I believed him. God help me, I believed him. He wasn't a brilliant student, but he stayed out of trouble. His teachers said he was polite, reserved, always respectful. I clung to that like proof, that maybe I was doing something right, that maybe we'd be okay. I gave that boy my entire world. Every stitch, every dollar, every tired smile. I built my life around him like a house made of thread, fragile, but neat. Strong in its own way. What I didn't know was that inside that house, something terrible was growing. Quietly, slowly, like mold behind the wallpaper. There were signs, but love makes you blind, hope makes you foolish, and a mother's guilt. Well, that'll silence even the loudest screams in your heart. I'll get to the rest, in time. But for now, just this. I raised my son with my own hands. And those same hands would one day learn how to tremble in silence. I gave him everything, my time, my spine, my nights. What I forgot was to leave something for myself. There's a strange thing that happens to women like me. Women who spend their lives folding other people's clothes, cutting crusts off sandwiches, writing grocery lists in pencil because we're too used to erasing our own needs. We forget to take up space. We become outlines of ourselves, shadows in aprons. And somewhere along the way, we begin to believe that love is proven through exhaustion. That was me. Eleanor Walker, Ashwood's tireless mother. I never let myself rest, not because I thought rest was wrong, but because I believed deep down that if I just kept giving, something beautiful would grow from it, like pressing seeds into dry soil, whispering to them, "Please, become more than me." Michael was the seed I watered with everything I had. He was barely 6 pounds when he came into the world, a quiet baby. He didn't wail like the others in the maternity ward, just blinked up at me with these pale green eyes that looked too old for his face. I remember thinking, he already knows life is hard. I tucked him inside my coat that night and promised I would never let anything hurt him. I didn't know then that sometimes what hurts you comes from inside the promise itself. His father, Richard, was gone before I had time to ask why. I saw him once more, about a week after I told him I was pregnant. He was sitting in a booth at the diner on 5th Street, laughing with some girl whose lipstick matched her nails. He didn't see me walk by, or maybe he did, and just decided not to flinch. I went home, boiled potatoes, and cried into a dish towel I never told anyone about. There's no poetry in being left, only silence. But I had a baby coming, so I learned to fill the quiet. I worked, yes, but this isn't a story about my job. You've already seen that part. The real story lived inside our home, in the tiny acts that built our lives. Every Sunday, I made his school lunches for the week and labeled them with little index cards that said things like, "You are brave. You are enough. I love you more than sleep." He never mentioned them, but he never threw them away either. On his 8th birthday, I couldn't afford the cowboy boots he'd circled in the Sears catalog. So I bought a cheaper pair at a thrift store, then spent 3 nights painting them by hand with silver stars and little red flames. He wore them until the soles came off. I mended his socks so many times I memorized the shape of his heels. Every growth spurt meant new pants, and I always found a way, even if it meant skipping dinner for myself. My cupboards were never full, but his closet always was. That was how I loved. Michael wasn't like other boys. Not wild, not loud. He played quietly, colored within the lines. He didn't bring friends home after school. When I asked if he wanted to invite someone over, he shrugged and said, "I'm fine, Mom. I like it here, just us." Sometimes I watched him from the hallway, sitting on the living room floor, lining up toy soldiers in perfect rows, his face calm, focused, unbothered. But a part of me always wondered what sat behind those eyes. What he thought about when he stared out the window so long I had to tap his shoulder to bring him back. He was affectionate, but not in the messy way kids usually are. He didn't jump into my arms or yell when I came home from work. Instead, he'd hand me a glass of water and say, "You should sit, Mom. You look tired." And I would, because I was always. There were no tantrums, no slammed doors, no yelling matches. I suppose most parents would call that a blessing, but in hindsight, that stillness, that eerie stillness, it wasn't peace, it was something else, something waiting. When Michael was 12, I found a notebook under his bed. It was full of drawings, shadows of people, all without faces. The pages were filled with buildings, rooms, windows, perfectly symmetrical, but always empty. Not a single person in any of the rooms. I asked him about it. He just shrugged and said, "I like quiet things." I told myself it was normal, artistic, sensitive. I told myself a lot of things back then. The loneliness of raising a child alone is like water damage. You don't always notice it until you see what's buckled. I had no one to talk to about his quiet, about the way his presence felt like furniture, something always there, but cold when you touched it. My co-workers at the factory talked about husbands who drank too much or kids who wrecked their bicycles. I never had much to add, so I smiled, nodded, went home and fried eggs in silence. There were nights when the silence became too much. I'd sit in the armchair by the window, knitting until my fingers cramped, radio humming faintly in the background. I used to pretend someone was on their way to visit, that the knock at the door might come, but it never did. And Michael didn't ask questions when he found me sleeping in the chair, a half-finished scarf falling from my lap. Sometimes I think I loved him so much that I forgot to notice when he stopped loving back. Or maybe he never did. Maybe all that kindness was just a mimicry of something he saw once and knew how to repeat. There's a danger in loving someone too much when you don't love yourself at all. I didn't leave space for boundaries. I didn't know how to say no because every inch of my life had been trained to say yes. Yes to working overtime. Yes to skipping dinner. Yes to Michael. Always yes to Michael. But no one ever asked if I needed anything. That's what I mean when I say a mother's hands don't ask for thanks. They hold, they lift, they give, until there's nothing left. I didn't know it then, but a storm had already begun. It would take years before I realized I was standing in the center of it. You never think you'll need to protect yourself from your child until the day you do. It started with a glance, not a long one, not obvious, just held a moment too long. Michael was 18 and already taller than me by half a head. He'd grown into a lean, broad-shouldered young man, quiet as ever, helpful as always. He still brought me a cup of water when I came home from the shop. Still said, "You should rest, Mom. You've done enough." Still kissed my cheek before bed. But something had shifted. I couldn't name it then, but I felt it. The way a bird senses a storm before the sky turns dark. He had a new way of looking at me. Not soft like before, not childlike. There was something else in his eyes, something searching. It made me want to cross my arms over my chest without knowing why. The first time I noticed it clearly, I had just come out of the bathroom, wrapped in my house robe. I'd been getting ready for bed. He was walking down the hall and passed me slowly, too slowly. His eyes dipped down, then flicked back up. He said nothing, just nodded and kept walking. But I felt cold afterward, like I'd left a door open somewhere. I tried to explain it away. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just a glance, harmless, awkward. 18 is a strange age, I told myself. A boy becoming a man. Hormones, misfires, that's all. But it didn't stop. The next time, he was helping me wash dishes. I was rinsing a bowl when I felt his hand on my shoulder. Then it slid, slowly, down my arm. Not just a pat or a brush, but a glide. A purposeful pause before pulling away. I stiffened. He smiled and said, "You've got soap on your sleeve." Then turned back to the sink. That night, I laid awake staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it tick. Am I making something out of nothing? Have I been alone too long? Is this just me being paranoid? Mothers don't want to think badly of their sons. We don't want to admit, even to ourselves, that something might be wrong with the child we nursed, bathed, tucked in each night with stories about bravery and kindness. And yet, there's a particular kind of silence that creeps into your bones when the danger lives inside your own home. It wasn't just the glances, it was the touches, the lingering hugs, the accidental brushes of his body against mine when he passed behind me in the kitchen. The way his hands would land on my waist instead of my shoulders when he offered help. Once he came into my room while I was folding laundry and offered to give me a back rub. "You've been hunched over all day," he said. "Let me take care of you for a minute." I hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed. He started with my shoulders firm, careful. Then his hands began drifting lower, too low, slow circles down my sides. I stood up suddenly. "That's enough," I said, too sharp. He laughed. "Geez, Mom, I'm just trying to help. You act like I'm doing something wrong." And that's when the guilt slithered in. Was I overreacting? Was I sexualizing something innocent? Had loneliness made me suspicious? And I'd never had a man in the house after Michael's father left, never remarried, never dated. I didn't want my son to think I was cold or closed off. I wanted to believe he was just affectionate, that I had raised him to be caring, attentive. But in the dark, those thoughts didn't soothe me. They only made me feel more alone. The moment I couldn't forget came one rainy Thursday afternoon. I had just come out of the shower and realized I'd left my towel in the bedroom. I wrapped myself in a robe and hurried across the hall. When I opened my bedroom door, Michael was sitting on my bed, flipping through one of my photo albums. His eyes were on an old picture me in my 20s, in a summer dress, holding him as a baby. He looked up, startled, but he didn't get off the bed. "You looked really pretty here," he said softly. I stood frozen. Water dripped from my hair onto the floor. My robe clung damp against my skin. I said nothing, just nodded. He handed me the album and left the room without another word. That night, I walked to the old utility closet, found the rusted brass padlock we'd once used to keep raccoons out of the shed, and screwed it into the inside of my bedroom door frame. It didn't match. The screws jutted awkwardly, the latch stuck, but it was mine. I locked my bedroom door for the first time in my life, and I cried afterward not from fear but from shame, because the only person I'd ever needed to protect myself from was my son. I began changing my routines, dressing in the bathroom instead of the bedroom, leaving lights on, keeping my cell phone under my pillow. I even stopped playing the radio in the evenings so I could hear footsteps. I told myself these were just habits, little precautions, but I knew, deep down, I knew. I still remember the sound that lock made every night, that faint metallic click. It was the sound of a mother giving herself permission to doubt. It was the sound of safety, forged too late. It was laundry day, and then the world went black. There are certain days that live in your body long after they've left the calendar. March 15th, 1999. I remember it not because I circled it, not because anything special was supposed to happen, but because it was a Monday. And in my house, Mondays were for laundry. I had woken early, as always 5:30 a.m., sharp, though the kitchen clock had long since stopped ticking. The red second hand still rested at the bottom like it always did, right above the spot where I'd glued a sliver of masking tape with Michael's name on it, back when he was starting kindergarten. That clock hadn't moved in years, but I never fixed it. Somehow, I preferred it that way. It told me the day had started, even if time itself had given up. That morning, the air in Ashwood was crisp, dry. A wind was pushing through from the mountains, tossing pine needles along the sidewalk like little messengers. I put on my navy work pants, the ones with the stitched hem, and tied my apron like I'd done 1,000 times before. Coffee. Toast. A banana for Michael on the counter. He was still asleep. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror before I left my reflection framed by steam and morning light. I remember thinking, I look older today. There was a tightness behind my eyes I couldn't place, a faint pressure at the back of my neck, but I brushed it off. I had laundry to finish at the factory and an order of coveralls due by noon. Ashwood Textiles wasn't a pretty place. It smelled like hot polyester and dye. The fans overhead just moved the dust around, but it was where I belonged. My machine was the third one from the left, under the skylight that always leaked in winter. I'd carved a tiny EW into the wooden base when no one was looking, my quiet signature on a life spent making things for others. The morning passed in a blur of cloth and motion. I was halfway through a pile of khaki uniforms when it happened. One moment, I was guiding fabric beneath the needle. The next, a thunderclap rang inside my skull. Not outside, but inside. A bolt of pain so sharp it felt like my brain had split open. My vision collapsed inward. The floor dropped out from under me. I remember hearing a chair scrape. A woman screamed. And then, nothing. When I opened my eyes, everything was white. The hospital smelled like bleach and latex and the breath of machines. I couldn't speak. I couldn't sit up. I tried to lift my left hand and it didn't move, not even a twitch. Panic rose, but my throat couldn't carry it. The doctor leaned over me, gentle, middle-aged, with soft gray eyes. He told me I'd had a stroke, a severe one, left-sided paralysis. He said I was lucky to be alive. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like I had been shelled from the inside out, like someone had taken me apart and left the pieces behind without instructions. Michael came the next morning. He looked shaken, eyes red. He brought flowers, told the nurses he would handle everything, told me he'd take care of me now, just like he always promised. "You raised me, Mom," he whispered. "Now it's my turn." At first, I believed him. What other choice did I have? When I was discharged, they brought me home in a wheelchair. The kitchen clock still read 5:30, the same minute I'd left the house 3 weeks earlier. For the first time, it didn't comfort me. It terrified me, as if time had waited for me, unchanged. As if nothing outside had moved while everything inside me had fallen apart. Michael was attentive, loving. He helped me bathe, helped me eat, helped me get in and out of bed. I cried the first time he brushed my hair. I told myself, "You did something right. You raised a good man." We had a visiting nurse, Martha, assigned by the hospital. She was in her 50s, practical and kind, with hands that smelled like lemon balm. She came 3 times a week to help me stretch, check my medications, help with basic hygiene. I liked her. She never pitied me, just did what needed doing and made sure I didn't feel like I was disappearing. But after a few weeks, Michael began to question everything Martha did. Said she was rough during the stretches, said she wasn't cleaning me well, said she wasn't respectful. I didn't see it, but I was tired. I let him speak. I thought he was just protective. Then one morning, Martha didn't show up. I asked why. "She wasn't the right fit," Michael said. "But she was kind," I whispered. "Kind isn't enough," he replied. "She could have hurt you." He started doing everything himself after that. Said he knew better than strangers, that only he could be trusted with my care. He moved the medicine cabinet into his room, took over the phone calls with the clinic, told the neighbors we needed quiet to help me heal. The house grew silent. Still. He unplugged the landline, kept my cell phone in a drawer. When Clara Johnson from next door stopped by with pie, he told her I was sleeping. When the ladies from church called, he told them I was too fragile to speak. I told myself this was love. I told myself this was protection. But even then, something in my chest began to ache, not from the stroke, but from the absence of air. He adjusted my pillows each night, brushed my hair, kissed my forehead, and somewhere, in all that careful tenderness, I began to feel like a piece of furniture, like something precious, but not safe. The kitchen clock still said 5:30. Day after day, time, it seemed, had stopped for both of us, but one of us was using it to heal, and the other to take. His hands called it hygiene. My skin called it terror. There is a kind of touch that doesn't leave bruises, but wounds you just the same. In the beginning, he was careful. So careful. Michael would explain everything he was about to do like a nurse trained by YouTube and desperation. "Mom, I have to clean around the folds of your skin, otherwise it could get infected. Mom, you need abdominal massage or your intestines will stop working." He used words like circulation, pressure points, prevention, and I, already drowning in shame and dependence, nodded. Because what else could I do? I had one working arm, no balance, no phone, no outside contact, and I couldn't even wipe myself without help. The first time he bathed me, it was awkward. I cried. He did not. He said, "You have to let go of the shame. This is just care." But care doesn't linger. Care doesn't graze a breast with fingers that pause too long. Care doesn't massage lower and lower while avoiding eye contact and whispering reassurances that feel colder than the water. It started with the bath. Then came the belly rubs. He said I was bloated. Said the doctor recommended massages to help prevent constipation. Lie back, Mom. Relax. This is for your health. His hands started at my ribs, soft at first, rhythmic, almost convincing. But then he'd slide downward beneath the fold of my belly, toward the inside of my thighs, pressing where no son ever should. When I flinched, he frowned. You have to trust me. You always told me trust was the root of healing. The guilt he wrapped me in was tighter than any towel. I stopped protesting, not because I stopped hurting, but because I started doubting whether the hurt was real, whether it mattered, whether I was still allowed to say no. He always had a reason, a logic so wrapped in pseudo-medical jargon I couldn't untangle it. He'd print articles off the internet about ulcers, about hygiene, about pressure sores. He'd say, I don't want to lose you to something as stupid as a rash. But there was nothing stupid about the way he touched me, nothing accidental, nothing maternal. And slowly, day by day, my body stopped feeling like mine. I was a patient, an object, a thing to be managed. Sometimes I would stare at the ceiling during those sessions and think, where did I go? Where is Eleanor, the girl who once danced barefoot in the back room of the textile mill during a blackout? Where is the woman who stitched coats until her fingers bled and still packed school lunches with apple slices carved into hearts? One afternoon, after he finished a massage, I asked him to bring me a mirror. I told him I wanted to check my hair. He hesitated, then brought the hand mirror from the bathroom. I looked, really looked. The left side of my face drooped slightly, just enough to make me look like I was forever tired. My eyes were uneven, my hair had thinned, and behind the sunken cheeks and dull lips, there was nothing. No spark, no fire, no trace of the woman I had once been. I didn't recognize myself, not just physically, but emotionally. My eyes looked back at me as if they belonged to someone else, a woman who had survived something but hadn't realized what yet. I started whispering apologies to the mirror, not to myself, but to the reflection I barely knew. I'm sorry. I should have run sooner. I'm sorry I told him he was good. I'm sorry I gave him everything and kept nothing for us. He began changing the way he spoke to me too. Called me his girl. Said things like, no one else would love you like I do. When I told him to stop saying that, he laughed. Why? You raised me to be loving, didn't you? That was the moment it hit me, not all at once, but like the slow seep of something rotten under the floorboards. He wasn't caring for me. He was claiming me, piece by piece, bath by bath, excuse by excuse. He told me once that paralyzed women were more prone to infection, that skin folds hid bacteria. Let me check, he'd say, and he would. Rougher each time, more insistent. My body would flinch on instinct, even if I had no strength to push him away. And the worst part? He always said it with love, softly, with a kiss to my forehead, as if to confuse the body into thinking cruelty was comfort. The horror wasn't just what he did. It was that I stopped knowing when it began and where it ended. I lost the borders of myself. He used to clean me until my skin turned red, scrubbed me in places I hadn't been touched in decades. He told me the rawness was good. Clean enough to bleed, he said once. That's how you know it's working. That sentence has never left me. It echoes inside the shell of me still. And each time I hear it, I think, his hands called it hygiene, but my skin called it terror. Mrs. Johnson thought she heard a dying animal. She heard a mother reclaiming her voice. It didn't start as a scream. It started as a breath I didn't know I still had. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, that pale, cracked ceiling with the water stain shaped like Alaska. I remember the sound of the wind outside, brushing pine needles against the kitchen window, and the sharp scent of bleach that always lingered after Michael cleaned the bathroom. Everything in the house smelled too clean, clinical, empty. He was humming in the kitchen, one of those old Elvis songs he liked. The tune floated in and out, off-key, too cheerful for a house built on silence. He'd just finished another treatment. I was sore between my legs. My skin ached from scrubbing. My heart thudded quietly in my chest, like a bird trapped in a shoebox. That day, he'd been rougher than usual. Maybe because I hadn't smiled. Maybe because I hadn't thanked him. Maybe just because he could. I remember lying there and thinking, if I don't make it to tomorrow, no one will know what happened to me. I will disappear as quietly as he's made me live. And something inside me cracked. Not loud, not heroic, just cracked. I opened my mouth. At first, only air came out. My throat burned from disuse, my vocal cords more fragile than I remembered. But then came the sound. Not words, not even a cry, just noise. Raw, broken, animal. A sound I didn't recognize as my own. I screamed, from the bottom of everything, from the marrow of years I had been silent. And Clara Johnson, who lived 2 houses down, heard it. She was watering her dahlias when it started. She told me later that she thought it was a dying raccoon, or a dog hit by a car. She almost ignored it. But something in the tone, something human and unbearable, made her drop the hose and walk toward my house. She found the back door unlocked. It always was. Michael said we didn't need keys anymore. No one's coming in and no one's going out, he'd joke. Clara came in through the kitchen, saw the bowl of uneaten oatmeal on the counter, the tea gone cold. My wheelchair parked too far from the table, then she heard it again, that terrible cracked open sound. She followed it to the hallway and then to my bedroom. She found me there, half-dressed, my robe askew, my good hand curled in a fist at my chest, and my mouth wide open, screaming like the world had finally begun to burn. Clara didn't ask questions. She didn't wait. She ran back to her house and called 911. Michael wasn't home. He had gone out to the store, said we were out of gauze and lotion. He liked to make sure I had everything I needed. The paramedics arrived in under 10 minutes, 2 men and 1 woman. They moved quickly, gently, asked me questions I couldn't answer. But when they asked if I wanted to go to the hospital, I blinked twice. That was all I could manage, but it was enough. At the ER, a nurse asked if I had a preferred caregiver. I blinked once. No. They assigned me a trauma doctor, a woman named Dr. Rachel Levin. She was maybe in her 40s, kind eyes, no wedding ring. She closed the curtain, sat beside me, and asked softly, "Eleanor, has someone hurt you?" I stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights buzzed like hornets. The air smelled like alcohol wipes and too many ghosts. She asked again, "Is it someone close to you?" Pause. "Is it your son?" And then, I nodded. The first movement I had made deliberately in almost 8 years, a small, slow tilt of the head, so slight it could have been mistaken for tremor, but I gave it everything. Every ounce of breath, of rage, of grief. The nod was mine. I owned it. "Doctor." Levin didn't gasp, didn't look away. She simply took my hand and said, "Thank you." It was the first time in nearly a decade that someone had touched me without taking anything from me. The report was filed. The nurses documented everything: the bruising, the inflammation, the signs of prolonged trauma. They treated me like a person, not a possession. Later that night, under soft sheets and warm lamplight, a social worker came in and asked if I wanted to press charges. I blinked once. Yes, I slept for 12 hours that night. My first sleep without fear in almost a decade. The next morning, the police came. Michael had returned home and found the house empty, found the wheelchair gone, found the silence he had created echoing without witness. They arrested him on the porch. Clara watched from her window. That same day, someone replaced the clock in the hospital room. It was a cheap plastic thing, ticking just slightly off beat, but it ticked. And for the first time, I believed time was moving again. For the first time, I believed I was too. Sarah brought chamomile tea and something rarer, safety. Her name was Sarah Whitman, though I hadn't seen her in almost 30 years. A cousin's daughter, born on the other side of the state. I remembered her as a gangly teenager with braces and butterfly clips, always sketching horses on napkins at family reunions. She found out what happened through Clara Johnson, who called the church prayer line. The church called her mother. Her mother called Sarah. And Sarah came. I wasn't expecting her. I was lying in a hospital bed under thin sheets, a plastic bracelet wrapped around my wrist like a shackle. My throat was dry, my left side still heavy, uncooperative. The world felt foggy, suspended, like I'd finally stepped outside the nightmare, but hadn't yet learned how to breathe the clean air. Then she walked in. A soft knock, a green sweater too big for her frame, curls tied back with a pencil, and a tray in her hands. Chamomile tea, still warm. "You probably don't remember me," she said, setting it down gently. "I'm Sarah. You once sewed me a Halloween costume, white wings, and a silver halo. I wore it 3 years in a row." Something in me cracked, not like before, not from pain, but from recognition, from being remembered. I tried to thank her, but the words wouldn't rise. So I did the only thing I could. I reached for her hand. She let me hold it. She let me cry. And she didn't fill the silence with anything but presence. 2 days later, she signed the papers, said she had space in her guest room and a wide porch with a view of Mount Angel, said she worked from home as a copy editor and didn't mind company. She looked the doctors in the eye and said, "She's not going to a nursing facility, she's coming home with me." And that's how healing began. The first week was a blur of naps and tears. My body had learned to exist in flinches, tensing every time a door opened, recoiling when someone reached too quickly. Sarah never rushed. She moved with the patience of someone who knew damage needed time to exhale. She spoke gently, kept the lights soft, played music in the afternoons, piano sonatas, mostly, with occasional bursts of jazz. She made tea every night, always chamomile, always in the same blue mug. She called it our evening ritual. I called it survival. The second week, I met Melissa. Melissa was a physical therapist with 4 arms like tree branches and a voice that could cut glass, but only when needed. She didn't talk much the first session, just helped me sit upright without collapsing, then helped me stand. That night, I wept into my pillow, not because of the pain, but because I had forgotten what it felt like to rise. We worked together 3 days a week. She never pitied me, never asked about the past, just focused on the present, weight shifting, core tightening, balance relearning. With each session, my left leg remembered how to carry me. My back began to hold itself up. My right hand, once so tired, grew strong enough to grip a mug without shaking. On the 4th week, she gave me a gift. A wooden cane carved with the image of a dandelion in seed. "Hope," she said, tapping the handle gently. "It floats, even after everything." I stared at it for a long time, the curve of the stem, the delicate fluff etched in light strokes, ready to fly. I named it Mercy. Sarah hung a wind chime on the porch that same week. Every morning, when the wind stirred the chimes, I practiced walking 10 steps forward, 10 steps back. Sometimes I fell, but always I stood again. Then came the visits with Dr. Harris. He was not what I expected. Young, black, with tortoiseshell glasses and a quiet voice that seemed to wait for my soul to catch up before he spoke. Our first session, he said nothing for the first 10 minutes, just sat across from me in a blue armchair, legs crossed, notebook closed. Finally, he asked, "When was the last time you felt safe in your own body?" I stared at him. He didn't ask me to tell him what happened. He didn't ask me to relive it. He asked me to describe my body like a house. Which rooms were locked, which ones still had light, which parts felt like mine. I told him I hadn't opened the kitchen window in years, that the bedroom was a crime scene, that the mirror in the hallway had become a stranger's face, that the hands I once used to cradle life now trembled with confusion. He nodded and said, "Let's find a way to come home to yourself." Week by week, we rebuilt. He taught me how to breathe when the flashbacks came, how to name them and let them pass like storms. He helped me uncouple touch from fear, body from betrayal. He gave me words I had long buried like consent, boundaries, self-worth, and showed me how to speak them out loud. I learned to ask for what I needed. I learned to say no and mean it. I learned to cry without apology. One day, Sarah brought out an old photo album I hadn't seen in years. She flipped to a picture of me at 23, standing in front of the sewing mill, apron dusted with thread. I was smiling, but it wasn't the smile of a woman who knew joy. It was the smile of a woman pretending. "I want to take a new photo," I told her. And we did. She wheeled me outside, propped me against the porch railing, the cane in my hand, the wind in my hair. I didn't smile. I just looked at the camera and stood as I was alive. That photo sits on the mantle now, not because it's beautiful, but because it's real. Healing doesn't come in a rush. It comes in teaspoons, in morning light, in silent cups of tea, in the hand you let yourself hold again. And sometimes in a cane carved with a dandelion, proof that even when you're blown apart, you can still float. The same hands he used to hurt me, now I used to help. I never imagined I'd return to Ashwood. For years, just hearing the name felt like swallowing broken glass. But time has a way of softening the edges of even the sharpest things. And healing, I've come to believe, doesn't always mean forgetting. It means returning with new eyes and letting yourself be seen in full. 2 years after Sarah took me in, I came back to the town that tried to bury me. Not to the same house I sold that the day the court signed the restraining order and I signed the deed away. That place was never home, only a shell. I needed soil that hadn't been poisoned. Instead, I found a sunlit storefront on the corner of Ashwood's old Main Street. It used to be a bakery, long abandoned, with flaking green paint and a bell that jingled just a second too late. The back room smelled like cedar, and the front windows caught the golden afternoon light like they'd been waiting for something warm to return. I named it Whispering Leaves Apothecary. I filled the shelves with dried herbs, tinctures, oils, and teas. I brought back my knowledge passed down from my grandmother, refined during quiet evenings with Sarah: calendula for skin healing, valerian root for restless sleep, lemon balm for grief. I stitched muslin sachets and labeled every jar by hand. I used the hands that once shook from trauma to offer steadiness to others. I never told most customers my full story. I didn't need to. Pain has a scent. It recognizes its own. They came quietly at first, women mostly. Some young, some older, some with bruises, some with just tired eyes and unshed tears. They didn't always ask for help. Sometimes they just browsed, touched the jars, sipped the tea samples, lingered a little longer near the lavender. Eventually, I started a weekly gathering. Thursday evenings. We called it the Quiet Circle. No sign, no flyers. Just a pot of warm tea, a circle of mismatched chairs, and a space where nothing had to be explained. Some women talked, others just listened. We shared remedies, both herbal and emotional. We learned to breathe again, laugh again, stitch our pieces together. One evening, a new man came into the shop. I noticed him right away because he stood differently, not like someone browsing, but like someone unsure if he belonged. He was tall, with a silver beard and work-worn hands. He looked at the chamomile, picked up the valerian, then asked, "Which one makes a man sleep without nightmares?" I smiled and handed him a blend I'd made 2 nights before. "Try this," I said, "but steep it slow, like healing. Rushing ruins the medicine." He returned the next week. Said the tea worked. Said he slept through the night for the first time since his wife passed. His name was Raymond. He was a retired woodworker who now made birdhouses and porch swings in his garage. We talked about bees, about weather, about pain that lives in the body even after the wound is closed. He never asked what had happened to me. And I never asked why he walked with a slight limp. We met in the present. That was enough. One day, I mentioned my front porch chair had cracked. Without a word, he came back the next day with his toolbox. He sat on the porch, whistling under his breath, sanding and mending the armrest like it was a violin. When he finished, he didn't ask for anything in return, just nodded once and said, "Every chair deserves a second chance." That chair still sits on the front porch of Whispering Leaves. I haven't painted over the patch. I left the mark he made where the raw wood meets the old grain. It reminds me that not all repairs need to be hidden. Some become part of the beauty. Raymond started coming every Thursday, not for the circle he respected that it was a space for women, But he'd wait outside, thermos in hand, whittling. Sometimes when the circle ended, we'd sit together and watch the sky dim. He never touched me without asking. Never asked for more than I wanted to give. The first time he held my hand, I flinched not from fear, but from memory. He didn't let go, just held me steady until my body remembered that not all touch hurts. One day, a woman named Ivy came into the shop. She was young, barely 20, and her eyes held that same haunted stillness I'd once seen in my own mirror. She said she needed something for sleep. I gave her a blend. As she turned to leave, she whispered, "He says I make him do it." My hands did not shake when I touched her shoulder. I said, "You didn't make anyone do anything, and you don't have to stay." She cried in the back room for an hour. I made tea, held space, and later helped her pack a bag. The same hands that were once stripped of autonomy now wrote down emergency shelters, held trembling cups, wrapped herbs in quiet offerings. They no longer flinched. They no longer asked permission to care. I kept the lights on late some nights. Not for profit, but for anyone wandering, unsure if healing was still possible. My name is Eleanor Walker. I'm 74 now, and I am not what happened to me. I am what I did next. He asked for mercy. I gave him silence. It was a Tuesday, rainy, but soft, the kind that clung to leaves like breath. I had just finished restocking the elderflower jars when the bell above the shop door chimed. I turned, expecting a regular, a woman needing something for her migraines, a teacher from the school looking for peppermint. Instead, it was him, Michael. But it wasn't the boy I had raised, or the man who had ruled over me in silence and threat. This person standing in my doorway was thinner than I remembered. His shoulders slumped, skin gray around the edges. He used a cane. His fingers trembled. His eyes, once cold and calculating, looked hollow, as if the wind might pass straight through him. We stood in silence. The only sound was the soft drip of rainwater onto the windowsill. My heart didn't race. My legs didn't freeze. I waited, and he spoke first. "Mom," he rasped. I don't have anyone." I didn't move. He swallowed hard and continued. "They say it's MS, multiple sclerosis. My hands are going. Can't work. Can't cook." I thought, his voice cracked, not out of grief, but need. "I thought maybe I could stay with you, just until I get set up somewhere. I don't want to die in a shelter." I studied his face, searching for the boy I once taught to tie his shoes, the child I read stories to when he was sick. But he wasn't there. That boy had vanished long ago on the day he decided my body was no longer mine. "My son died," I said quietly, "the day he turned me into an object." He flinched, not dramatically, just a slight movement, as if the words slapped him gently rather than struck. I took a breath, steady and full. I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. I was clear. "You didn't just hurt me," I said. "You erased me, and now you've come to see if there's anything left to take." His cane tapped nervously against the tile. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looked at the floor. "I'm sick," he said. I nodded. "So was I. And you made sure I stayed that way." He shuffled forward an inch. "I'm not asking for much, just a place to sleep. I won't be any trouble." My hand rested on the counter, not clenched, not ready to strike, just resting, steady. "You already were," I said. He looked up then. For the first time, I saw something that might have once been remorse, or maybe just regret that his plan didn't work. Either way, it didn't matter. "I forgive you," I said. His eyes widened, but I continued. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry you anymore." He said nothing. "I built this life from ashes. With hands you tried to break, I poured healing into every corner of this shop, into myself, into others. There's no room here for what you bring." Outside, the rain had begun to fall harder. He turned slightly toward the door. "I don't have a home," he whispered. "You left home the moment you chose control over care," I said. "This is not your shelter. He looked around once more, at the jars, the tea, the photos of women smiling in the quiet circle. He saw the life I had built without him, and he realized it would go on, whether he stayed or not. Then he left. He didn't slam the door. He didn't look back, just disappeared into the rain, the way ghosts do when they're no longer needed to haunt anything. I stood in the quiet, breathing in the silence. It didn't hurt. It didn't sting. It just was. That night, I went into the linen closet. At the very back, behind folded quilts and unused pillowcases, I found it the pillow he used during those years, the one I could never bring myself to throw away. Beige, flattened, still stained faintly with the scent of lavender oil he used to rub on my arms like a lie. I took it out to the garden, lit a small fire in the metal basin I used for burning dried herbs, and I placed the pillow in. It caught slowly. Then it blazed. I didn't cry. I didn't chant. I didn't say a prayer. I just stood and watched it turn to ash. Not as revenge, but as release. The next morning, I brewed a new tea blend: chamomile, rose, and a hint of dandelion. I labeled it Mercy and placed it on the shelf with the others. It sold out by the end of the week. I planted pain. What grew was purpose. The shop opens every morning at 9. I unlock the front door of Whispering Leaves Apothecary, sweep the porch, refill the tea jars, and set a fresh bouquet of wildflowers in the window. The light filters through the glass, just so soft, golden, forgiving. I walk with my cane still. Not because I can't manage without it anymore, but because it reminds me of how far I've come. The carved dandelion near the handle is worn smooth from my grip. I like to think the wind carried its seeds everywhere I needed to go. Ashwood has changed, or maybe I have. People stop me on the street now, not with pity, but with warmth. They ask what blend is best for grief, or whether calendula really helps with scarring. A high school girl once slipped me a note that said, "Thank you for existing." Most days, that's enough. A few months ago, a journalist from the Ashwood Sentinel came into the shop. She bought a jar of ginger salve for her arthritis, then lingered longer than most customers do. "I've heard stories," she said softly, "about what you've built here." I didn't flinch. She asked if I'd be willing to be interviewed, said the town could use some light. I hesitated, then nodded. Not for myself, but for the women who still walked in with shaking hands and downcast eyes, not yet ready to speak. The article ran on a Sunday, page 2. Ashwood's quiet hero, the woman who turned hurt into healing. There was a photo, just me in my apron, standing in the doorway, a mug in hand, and the sign behind me that reads, "You're safe now." I didn't recognize the woman in the picture at first. She stood so tall, so still, her face lined, yes, but open. There was no flinch in her posture, no apology in her eyes. Sarah framed the clipping and gave it to me with a wink. It sits near the register now, beside a jar of dried lavender and a little wooden plaque Raymond carved that reads, "Keep growing." He still visits. Brings me birdhouses, cinnamon sticks, and silence that feels like company. The quiet circle has grown. We've moved it to the back garden now, under the maple tree. There's a string of paper lanterns we light at dusk. Women come from towns I've never been to. Some just sit, some speak, some sob for an hour and never return. But all of them are offered the same things: tea, time, and truth. Last Thursday, a new woman arrived, mid-40s maybe, with a fresh bruise blooming under her sleeve and a look I recognized, like a reflection. She didn't speak during the circle, just stared at her hands, as if unsure whether they still belonged to her. After the others had left, I invited her into the kitchen behind the shop. The kettle was already warm. I reached for my favorite, the glass teapot with the delicate lid. A little chipped on the rim, but still beautiful, still useful. I spooned in the lavender leaves, poured the boiling water, and watched the swirl of color rise like ink in a new story. Steam curled against the cool window, fogging the edge like breath on glass. I handed her a cup and said gently, "The worst part of trauma is thinking you'll never feel safe again. But you will. We all do, eventually." She didn't respond, but she took the cup with both hands, held it to her chest like something sacred. The tea glowed warm and purple in the light. The teapot sat between us, translucent and fragile. You could see every movement within it, each herb blooming, each bubble rising, like a heart that had learned not to hide. That teapot is my favorite for a reason. It's see-through. It's delicate. But it holds heat longer than any of the others, and inside it, healing brews slowly. Without force, without shame, just warmth and time. I used to think strength was silence, endurance, not crying. Now I know better. Strength is making space for others when no one made space for you. It's standing barefoot in the ruins and planting something anyway. It's letting someone sip from the same cup you once thought would never be full again. My name is Eleanor Walker. I am 75 years old, and I am not a secret. I am not a tragedy. I am not a footnote in someone else's story. I am the author of mine. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of a name, a moment, a silence you once carried, then let it be more than just a memory. Let it be a beginning. Eleanor Walker's story may have ended here, but yours is still unfolding. You don't need a courtroom or a newspaper article to reclaim your voice. Sometimes it starts with a whisper in the dark. Sometimes it's a cup of tea shared across the table. And sometimes it's simply saying out loud, "This happened. I am still here." We believe every woman deserves to be heard, every grandmother, every mother, every survivor who's ever been told to sit down and stay quiet. So if you found comfort in this chapter, share it. Not for us, but for the next woman who needs to hear she's not alone. Like this video, pass it along, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter so you don't miss the stories still waiting to be told. And above all, when you're ready, tell your story. We're listening. We always will.